are back, jumping right into our second conversation. As we know, in the wake of the COVID-19 world pandemic, worldwide and Belize, one of the hardest hit industries has been tourism and specifically hotels. And here to talk to us this morning about how that has affected Belize in terms of hotels and what we can look forward to in the future, we are speaking with Ted Tejada, who is the president of the Belize Hotel Association. And good morning, Ted.
Good morning. Good morning, Gavin and
Yeah. So, I started out by saying, of course, we know that this has been a huge impact on the hotel industry in Belize.
Yes.
So, perhaps you can start by maybe describing sort of what the current situation is and how the virus has affected the hotels so far.
Yes. So what we did, we started 1 week ago. We hired 12 individuals to help us to put a census together. And as you know, there's approximately 900 hotels around the country of Belize. So if we physically called every single hotel that exists in the country of Belize. Surprisingly, 70% of them we were able to get a hold. The other 30% had got completely closed by then. At that point in time, we still had flights. As you know, the last flight left on Monday.
Yes.
So there were still the 10% of guests in the hotels that were waiting for that final flight to get out of the country. But as of today, as you know, the major sector, which is San Pedro, which has over 20% of the entire hotel rooms, is quarantined for 31 days. So there's no activity happening. The rest of the country has also dried out. It's completely dried. So at this point of time, we have 99% of the hotels actually closed down indefinitely, because we do not know when this is going to stop. Yes.
So I'm trying to, we know the numbers that the BTB's been reporting for years, and it's just been a constant climb in terms of people coming to Belize, and even what was usually the slow season, it extended,
Yes.
the high season extended into what used to be the slow season. So people went from the peak just flatlining.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that's so unfortunate, because, when we look at other pandemics such as a hurricane, we know 1 month in advance that we are going into the hurricane season. Hotels tend to kind of cut down their staff, getting prepared. We buy our plywood, we start getting ready for, if in the case that happens, 3 weeks in advance, we know where it is going to go. In this particular case, there was no warning. Not only that, we are in the high season. Hotels had employed more people than they actually needed. This was one of the best years we had seen. Actually, March, we can say that most of the hotels were already booked for Easter. We had operators calling and said, "Do you know who has rooms? We need rooms."
Wow.
We couldn't find rooms. So most of the hotels were completely full. And this pandemic, in 1 week, everybody just saw their revenue just washed away in 1 week.
Now,
And
hotels are usually prepaid, though. Did you refund? Did you give a voucher? I mean, what was the recommendation, or what was the expectation from customers?
The expectation of most of the customers, and I think the right thing to do was to, in terms of especially corporate hotels, was to refund the money. The corporate chains such as the Best Westerns, the Radissons, the Hiltons, they oblige you. Actually, their cancellation is 72 hours prior to your arrival.
Okay.
And due to this pandemic, was forced on us to give back the money. At this point in time, many airlines refuse to do so. I was reading an article yesterday that there will be cases where they will be forced to give back the money to the customers. It is a customer, it is not a God sent in disease. So it's something that is going to cost, at this point in time, even more hardship, because some of the hotels will see chargebacks on their bank accounts from individuals going to the bank and said, "I didn't go and I need my money."
Yeah.
So
What's your estimated loss of revenue?
I would say, when I looked at it after the census, we have about 9,000 room nights in the country. We figured out that the employment in Belize is 0.9 of a room. So The international numbers is like every room you have one employee. So if you have 9,000 rooms, you have 9,000 employees. In Belize, we were able to find that it's like 0.9, close to the 1%. So that means that the hotels themselves employ close to 9,000 employees. But you got to realize the effect it has, because you have your operators, you have your guides, you have the archaeological sites, you have the taxi drivers, you have the vegetable guy, you have the chicken guy, all of those, Boeing that produces the drinks for us, we're no longer buying from these establishments. The companies that do the ads for us, we're no longer buying ads on these. And so you can see the entire meltdown from different sectors because the tourism sector is down. We're estimating that tourism produces about $1 million Belize dollars per month in terms of revenue. Yeah. 100 million, sorry, in revenue per month. So multiply that $100 million times the amount of months that this will be shut down, and that's the estimate that we're estimating how much this will affect the country of Belize.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the economic impact is one that perhaps, because we are in the thick of things right now, not a lot of people have had time, people who are not associated with the industry, to kind of let that number settle in. And it is going to be astronomical.
Yes.
The thing, though, is that the layoffs was really the first thing that people started to hear about.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they happened quickly.
Definite.
You know, it's a tough position to be put in, facing an unknown amount of time with the pandemic and not having a source of income.
That's correct.
Tell me about, you're with Best Western. What
Yes.
did you decide to do in your individual hotel, and what's been kind of the standard?
You know, at the Best Western, we employ 114 full-time employees, not, like I said, including the contractors that do work for us and the vegetable guy that we buy, but the 114 employees. And when we were faced with a single, I can tell you within a single week, we saw the cancellations just wipe out. And you have to bear in mind one thing with this pandemic. It is not a situation that we're seeing, okay, March, we lost March, everything is dried. We've lost April, everything is dried. Yeah. We're going to lose June, everything is going to be dried. We're going to lose July. And so the mind of every hotelier or every business guy out there is saying, okay, we have a situation that I would like to help my employees. They have been with me for a longer period of time. But if I know I can recoup in the month of May, we can go ahead and afford it. But when you don't know if you're going to be able to stand the 1st of June or the 1st of July or the 1st of August, it becomes a nightmare because you have incurring costs. You have your mortgages to pay. You still have to keep the lights of the hotel open. You have your liabilities, your insurance that you still have to pay. So when you look at your overhead cost, you already have, let's say, $250,000 per month that you have to finance just to keep your doors open. And there's not one single drop of income coming in. At that point in time is where all the owners are starting to make decisions. And let me tell you, after doing the census, we did 70% of them actually answer the phone. And out of 70%, it was stunning to hear many of them say, I want to help my employees. I want to keep them. But the sobering question is, at what point will we be able to keep them? How long, knowing the situation that at this point we have flights in May that you're able to book and reasonable $350, but more than likely those flights will disappear. You might still have the bookings in your system because people are saying, you know, I might be able to fly, but with the borders being closed, then those reservations will be washed out. So we're seeing reservations being washed out 1 month in advance. And so I believe we come the 1st of April, you will see the entire reservations of May completely wiped out. Comes the 1st of May, you see the entire reservations of June wiped out if we do not get a control of this.
And all of that money will have to be returned, like in your
That's
case.
correct. That's
so
correct.
whatever you currently have in the reservations that are made those are most
That's
likely
correct.
going to be returned.
That's going to be returned.
So you're not just losing from not having money coming in, you're going to have to pay out what you've already
That is the
received.
worst part, that you have collected, you have it in your receivables, in your something that you, liability that you owe. Now you have to take it back. You have the bank charges that you had to pay, which most of it is about 3 to 4%. And now you have to return that money, and at the end of the day, you still have your employees that you want to keep.
So
Did you lay off people?
At this moment in time, let me tell you, we have been reviewing, which is not just laying off. You look at it, we have to close down the bars, the restaurants, the shuttles. Even if you pay your employees, you don't want them in the hotel. You do not want them having nothing to do and contaminating one another. At this point in time, we have to figure out that we don't have any in the country of Belize. We already have two cases in San Pedro. That has been isolated. What we are asking, and we need to figure it out, is that there's no more cases. We need that recess of 15 days minimum to figure out that there's no more cases, so there's some type of normality that will come back to the country of Belize. At this moment, like you said, we need to sit down very far, and we have a new norm. People are no longer venturing out to the restaurants, going out to have a drink. Why? Because they're all afraid.
Yeah.
There's a panic settling in. And until we can figure out that at this moment there's no more cases, Belize has been completely isolated apart from those 2 cases that we found. There's no more cases. I think there's going to come back a sense of ease within the population and say, you know what, the borders are closed. There's no more airlines coming in. We've spent 15 days. We figured out that there's no more of this virus in the country. There's going to be a little bit of ease from all of us to be able to venture out a little bit, because the only way you can get the virus is by somebody bringing it in.
Yeah.
And once you have isolated the country, you found the cases, then within the country, we know that we're secured.
And have you also had conversations within the association? I know that you had said earlier that you had done the census, and we've also heard the government talking about sort of how they plan to manage the situation and offer relief. So are there also conversations among the hotels themselves as to how they're going to manage this crisis and what's going to to keep the industry alive, basically?
We have to keep the industry alive. Tourism brings about 40% of the GDP of this country, which is a substantial amount. The government has come forward, and we applaud them for finding some money for not only, and we're saying, this is not going to affect only the tourism sector. It's already affecting many other sectors.
Yes.
That have been calling us and said, I had the gentleman that does our uniforms and says, hey, there's anything for us to do. Between Monday to Friday last week, we didn't get any orders. You have the radio stations that we had to reduce our contract that we have with them because we no longer need the advertising. Yeah. Nobody's venturing it out. Nobody wants to hear an advertisement. Right now, they're all about the containment and not getting infected. So there's so many different other industries that get affected because of tourism. So they decided that they will be giving $75 per employee. One of the things that we have to figure out that we are in good consultations with Carla Barnett and Chris Koyi. They are engaged with the association. They are finding out how they can help us. The only thing that we discussed, because at the press conference yesterday, they said that they will only give it to people that are fired from the industry. Yeah. And we want to make it very clear. There's many of our employees that have not been fired. We do not want to fire them. I have employees that have worked at the Biltmore for 15 years. Why, at this moment, you do not need the services. You don't need your bartender. Your bar is closed. So you have to fire your 5 bartenders? No, you want to retain them. The thing is that we cannot support to pay them their salaries while there's no income coming in. So Chris is going to look, and Carla is going to look into it. How do we pay these employees that are not fired?
So they're not unemployed.
They're not unemployed.
A lot of people have done this. They send them home on vacation with no leave.
Yes.
With no pay, sorry.
That's correct.
Because then you're not technically terminated. You
That's
can come
correct.
back when things recover.
Yes.
But you're also not earning an income.
That's correct. I mean,
Yeah.
we have every year we have a Christmas gathering, and I'm telling you, my employees look forward to see who has 10 years, who has 15
Yeah.
years, and look forward to, oh, I just completed so many years with this company. And at this point in time, if you have to fire them just to get on that compensation package, we don't think is fair.
Yeah.
So we are saying, at this point in time, they have to understand that 99% of the hotels are closed.
Yes.
Many of us are seeing how we are going to retain some of our employees. We cannot retain all of them, but that package has to be able to help them because they're not going to be fired. But at this point, the hotels are saying, if I have to fire them to get on that package, we'll have to do so.
Wow. Well, I hope they're able to work out a solution because people do want to have something to look forward
Yes.
to when things start to normalize.
Definitely.
You know, Ted, one of the things we haven't really put into perspective is how early the tourism sector took a hit. So we didn't confirm our first case until this Monday.
Yes.
But what really happened was what was happening in the rest of the world. The minute Europe,
Yes.
for example, got cut off and the virus started to spread beyond China,
Yes.
that's when your disaster
Yes.
started. So it was way before we started to have business closures and kind of the impact happening here.
So
That's the case, right?
Yeah, that's the case.
Yeah.
I started to realize this on February 22nd. We had some business meetings actually in Milan, in Italy, and we were supposed to leave on the 26th of February.
Aren't you so glad you
Yes,
didn't
on the
go?
22nd, I get a phone call. We do have a representative in the Netherlands who says, have you been watching the news? There were 14 cases at that point in Lombardo, which is very close to Milan. So immediately we decided to change tickets and say, you know what, we got to change tickets. And then there was a biggest fair in Berlin. Belize was going to advertise. And we decided, okay, we're going to go to Berlin, only to Berlin. We're no longer going to go to Italy. But within a week, that pandemic in Italy just took ground and it's just decimated most of the cities. Berlin as well, they only had 14 cases at that point in time. It was so surprising that the federal government had to come in and lock down and said, no, this fair will not take place in my city. But you had several delegates who had traveled ahead of time, which many times we do, to do some sightseeing in the country. And within a week, from 14, it had gone to 6,000. Only imagine, which we had 250,000 people going to the ITB fair. What would have happened in Berlin with 250,000 from 200 countries getting together to do business? So it has decimated that. And at that point in time, I knew that it was coming down to Belize. I started sensitizing the industry, saying, listen, this is what is happening. We've already traveled from China to Italy to Berlin. It was coming down this way, and start to prepare to plan. Look at all what you need to cut. Do your math, because it's coming. And within a week, I can tell you, that we saw millions of dollars just washed away within 1 week. That has recently never happened for a long time. And so when will it come back? I think we need first in Belize to figure out that Belize has no cases. Because the longer we take to figure that out, if a country, let's say Guatemala, has now cleaned itself and they're clean, but we don't know if there's still remnants of cases in Belize, it would take longer for them to do business with us.
Okay.
We need to figure out that we in Belize have no cases. At that point in time, we can also not open the borders, because the minute you open the borders, it's going to pour back in. So we need to identify the countries that have done the same thing, that have cleaned their system and they have had 20 days without any cases before they say, you know what, we now can trade with Guatemala, we can do business with that country because that country is also clean.
How do you plan ahead for something like that? Because let's look at the different issues. One, it's how long our borders will need to be closed. If we get to a point where the 2 cases that we have are no longer active, they're recovered, we don't detect new cases in, let's say, a 15-day period or
Perfect.
longer, and we feel that we have no more cases, we can't open borders. Well, I'm not saying that that's the case, but it would be, I'd imagine we wouldn't open the borders if people around us
Yes.
still have it, because you just bring it back into
That's
the
correct.
country.
That's correct.
So that's one thing. You'd
Yes.
have to rely on local business, have Belizeans moving around. But then there's the economic impact that will happen. We know
Yes, definite,
everywhere.
definite.
And if you go back to, let's say, 2008, the last time there was the recession in the United States,
Yes.
it took a while before people started traveling again.
We know that this is going to take a long time before it, especially now that the U.S. is a third country with the most cases, and we rapidly see that escalation. We got to bear in mind that we get 60% of our business of tourism comes from the United States. One of the things that we need to understand that the tourism that comes to Belize is not that tourism that wants to go to Playa del Carmen and Cancun and lay on the beach and do nothing. We have more of a rustic tourism that comes and they want to do the jungle, they want to go swim with the sharks. And so we feel that that type of tourism will come back quicker. Not only that, if we were to do a study that I don't know if we've ever done it, is what is the percentage of return customers to Belize? I believe that percentage will be very high. When we look at the statistics of resorts and they come back and say, oh, I know this gentleman, I know that guest, because we have, I believe, a 30% returning customers to Belize. So that helps us a lot. They're in love with the country. They want to come back. And not only do they come back, they bring their friends when they come. So if we can be one of those countries that can start putting a flag and say we are clean before anybody else. We were one of the last ones to say we had the first case to start with. Now, not only did we had 2 cases, we're clean. We've found it, isolated them, and there's no more cases. When it's time to open the borders, I believe that we were going to be one of the first ones as well to start selling easy, because people will say, oh, they did a very good job in containing. They were able to take steps immediately and contain that and move away from it.
And I think, I would imagine that one of the things that you'd also be looking at if and when we are, COVID-free, is that one of the things that you'd also be looking at is to sort of promote local tourism while the borders are still closed.
And that's what we're saying. If at this moment, I can tell you, Marlene, even if we would like to have our restaurant open and employ our Belizean people and say, you know what, even if 3 people come, we'll keep it open. At this moment, nobody's coming. Why? Everybody's afraid. There's fear in them that, I cannot come because I am going to get contaminated. And we have to remember, and I would like to emphasize what happened over the weekend with the first case, where people went online and criticized this individual. We have to really make it a point that that is not tolerated. It's not going to be allowed at any point.
It's counterproductive.
We have to understand this is a silent killer. I mean, I have had a close encounter with a case similar to it, where the individual traveled to Belize, and the case did not become positive until the individual went back to the U.S. The situation is that the individual lives in New York, and the time that it took, by the time he came to Belize and the case was declared, it was 12 days after. 12 days after. So you say, by the time this individual came, by the time you found out, it's 12 days after. In this case, the Ministry of Health was able to map and say, this individual caught it on the way out. He went through Miami to New York, which is the hotbed, and he got infected. By the time he arrived in the U.S. and he reported it, it had been 5 days. So it kind of has a correlation. But I'm telling you, the chills that it sends to your back, that anybody can contaminate you. You are drinking that coffee. If you were in my restaurant and you were contaminated, my waiter will pick it up and take it to the back. That she just got contaminated by serving you. The person that washes that cup just got contaminating by taking that cup to wash it. And we just contaminated 2 that will go home and contaminate their home. And how can we penalize them for serving you? I mean, just put yourself in that situation. We all can get contaminated very easily, especially the customs officers, the immigration officers, the airline staff, the hotel staff, the doctors, So we have to really make some noise about that, that we have to be careful about that, how we're penalizing people with.
It seems to me very clearly from what you have communicated so far, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you perhaps feel that we should move into a lockdown phase.
You know, we're recommending that at this moment, we need to figure out that the country is clean. We're saying we can see, like I said, in this particular case, the peoples that can get affected. My waiters that serve an individual that gets on the bus to goes home, that goes to a shop to buy, that uses the ATM machine, not knowing that this virus is going, using that particular scenario, how much people can get to affected. How can we map that? It's impossible to map it. 11 days after, I'll be honest with you, I looked at the whole scenario, it's impossible to map that 11 days after. If you knew by the following day, then you say, oh, I was here, and these are the people around me. 11 days after, I mean, I can't even remember where I was. So it is a silent killer that we don't know. It takes between 0 to 14 days to peep outside with his head, and by then we have a situation that might become uncontrollable. So I think for the population, we are all living with fears in our own homes. Like I said, every day that I go home, I mean, I just this week on Monday, when they blocked down San Pedro, I had people checking at the hotel, and I told my front desk, but we don't have any reservations. Who are these people? Oh, Mr. Ted, these are the ones that got stranded that couldn't go to the airport. So I personally went to speak with the guests and said, where are you heading? He said, oh, we're heading to San Pedro, but the flights are canceled, the boats are canceled. We just arrived on the flight. I said, where are you coming from? From New York. And I said, how long you need to isolate yourself? He said, they didn't tell us. We don't need to isolate ourselves. I said to myself, at what point are we going to allow individuals to come into the country, not isolate themselves, coming from hotbeds? And we got to realize now the borders are closed and there's no more airlines coming in. So at that point in time, it's just a sobering saying, I have an individual checking into the front desk from a hotbed, from the United States. The entire United States now has become a hotbed. And we are not dictating to them that they must isolate themselves minimum 14 days.
So what are you, I mean, the last flight that left Belize was on Monday.
On Monday, yes.
There were people who still came in. A lot of Belizeans
correct.
came home.
That's correct.
And that means that your staff, you've had a lot of exposure.
That's correct.
What do you have practices in place, kind of
We
monitoring symptoms and whatnot?
We have been, actually from last week, we have a person in the lobby checking temperatures with a temperature laser gun that will tell us if the individual is 37 degrees Celsius and below. Anybody that is above, if it is an employee, we immediately are not allowing them to come into the compound. We are sending them home. Not are we only sending them home, we are asking them to immediately contact the medical attention and say, hey, I have a fever, I need some medical attention. If it's a guest, which we have not had in the case, we would have done the same thing. We had designed 4 rooms as an isolation rooms where we would have checked them in and recommend that we called medical attention so that they can be checked because their temperature would be above. We have sanitizers all over the lobby. We sanitize the front desk as soon as somebody leaves. You got to realize we're in the hospitality industry. So we cannot show the guest, for example, take your passport and say, okay, you've been through China or you've been, it is not recommended.
You can't
discriminate anybody, but it's a tough situation.
So your last guest who came in from an international flight to check in
was on Monday.
Was on Monday.
That's correct.
So you're not really sure till 14 days from now.
That's correct.
Are they self-isolating from what you're seeing, the guests that have checked in?
You know, I checked on Tuesday because I was leaving the hotel when I spoke with the guest in a meeting. I checked on Tuesday and the guest had checked out. That I know the guest was heading to San Pedro. I don't know where the guest ended up, but just shows to tell me that, you know, there's no follow-up or quarantine being practiced. And that's the dangerous part of it. That every guest that came in through that airport for this last week, the authorities had to put them on mandatory quarantine. Yes, if you're coming into the country, before you board the plane, sir, ma'am, you're coming from a hot area, we will allow you. You're a Belizean.
These were Belizeans that checked in?
This was not a Belizean,
Oh,
this was
okay,
an American.
Okay, just making
But
sure.
even an American,
Yeah.
you know, if you have decided to come and we know the situation, we should have mandatorily said you need to isolate yourself for 14 days. Some have some tracking system. It's very hard. I mean, you have, in that plane, she told me there were 14 people on that flight. So there's 14 individuals coming in. So we need now to track 14 individuals. And then you had an Air Canada, WestJet, American Airlines. So you have several airlines coming in. And that, so it's a difficult situation. But yes, from Monday, when the borders were completely shut, at that point in time, we need to have taken a recess and say, you know what, let's find out that there's no cases. And once there's no cases, you're going to have a peace of mind with all of us Belizeans that the virus does not exist anymore in the country, and that we can be able to still practice the social distance, the new norm, but at least be at ease that no one for example, in our case, none of my staff, none of my managers are contaminated, and we don't know until that period of time.
I can hear with the example that you just gave why it's unsettling for you, the idea of people still moving around. And I think that's the consensus all around. Just before we close, the Hotel Association works closely with BTB, local agencies, but you also have partners in other parts of the world. What's kind of the collective thinking at this time? Is it just sitting ducks waiting to see what's going to happen?
No, I think we're looking at data. We have data. That's the beauty about the tourism industry. You know, data is very important. Right now, all the bookings for the entire world, Central America and the Caribbean, has completely ceased. So we know, for example, Belize, all the islands have a 90 days booking window, meaning that people are booking 90 days in advance. That has ceased. And so countries that are taking the measures where they're locking down and leaving the essential services, pharmacies, grocery stores open so that the population can still get their medicine, I mean, we believe, we haven't seen it because it's an early stage and they're still infected and they haven't been cleaned, but we believe that they will be able to start doing business as soon as they get over the crisis. It is too early to say, but no, the countries, we are not at all right now marketing anything. We'll be honest with you, nobody's listening to your marketing message out there. Doesn't matter if it's a free room, they're still not listening to the free rooms. They at this moment want to find out, how do we contain it? How do we get a grasp of it? I mean, our partners, our operators, all of them are right now dealing with losses. People that had groups coming in from Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, these groups got stranded at different places. I mean, I had a group coming in from Mexico that was just before the border closed, one day before, and they were going Mexico, Belize 2 nights, and then going into Guatemala. The group ended up going back to Cancun. What does that mean is you got to change all your tickets because they were supposed to leave out of Guatemala, not of Cancun. So these companies inherited tremendous losses that right now they're all just trying to figure out how they're going to pay these losses. In Guatemala, they closed the country, the entire country, for 15 days. So they cannot even go to work to figure out. They're at home trying, they still have to pay their employees. They have these losses at hand. They're trying to figure out how do we. But all I can say is that everybody's ready. Everybody's ready
to get back
start
to business.
And
that's what I hear from you. You know, there are a lot of concerns, and I think you, of course, we all are concerned, but because it's directly affecting or severely impacting the tourism industry. But I still hear optimism. That once things normalize, you feel that those people who love Belize will make an effort to get back here as quickly as possible.
Definitely.
Ted, thank you for coming in and giving us an update. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, cleaning your house, disinfecting your surfaces. We're going to get some expert advice to make sure you're doing it right. Please stay tuned.